In 2010, I was driving from New Orleans, Louisiana to Eugene, Oregon. It was just me, a 24-year-old woman, and my 2-year-old pit bull in a 14-foot U-Haul truck with everything I owned crammed into the back. I had a fancy flip phone, a printout of MapQuest directions, and about 5 hours of sleep total. I was driving a lonely stretch of highway through central Texas when I realized I hadn't seen a town or an exit for a very long time, and my giant U-Haul was really low on gas. Just as I was starting to freak out, I saw a small town come up. I pulled into the town and it was tiny, only about 6 streets in the whole place. I filled up my gas tank and was ready to get back on the road. Except I couldn't for the life of me find my way back to the highway. I circled the town about 4 times and started getting frustrated because this was such a tiny town. I could literally see the highway, but I couldn't get to it. I returned to the gas station to ask for directions. I'd paid at the pump before, so this was my first time inside. Behind the counter was a skinny, nondescript guy with black hair hanging down in front of his eyes. He never really met my eyes. He gave me directions that didn't sound right at all. He was telling me to take a road that would get me to the highway in about 17 miles. I pointed out that I hadn't driven that far to get from the highway into town. Why so far to get back to the highway when I could literally see it? He gave me some explanation about the road curving around that didn't really make sense. He still didn't look at me. "I gave you your directions," he said, waving his hand toward the door. When I got into the parking lot, my whole body started trembling violently and my heart started racing, seemingly for no reason. I burst into tears as soon as I put the key in the ignition. I had the most terrible, gut-wrenching feeling that no matter how nonchalant he acted, this man had bad intentions. I knew I couldn't follow his directions. I decided I didn't care if this town seemed like something dropped out of the Twilight Zone. I was going to drive around until I found my own way out. Then a big red beater of a pickup truck, as much rust as metal, pulled up and disgorged the quintessential Texan man. Huge, husky, and in flannel and work boots. I jumped out of the truck and quickly approached him. I asked him if he could please give me directions to the highway. He cheerfully gave me directions for a hairpin curved turnoff right at the end of a small concrete tunnel I'd passed several times. I asked him how far it was back to the highway in miles. He laughed. "Miles, miss? I'd say it's a quarter mile at most. You can see the highway right from here." I had to know. I told him the directions the man in the store had given me. He grabbed a ragged local map from his glove box and traced the route the man from the gas station had told me to go. The road led away from town, away from the interstate, and into the middle of nowhere. He told me the road did indeed go about 17 miles before it dead-ended in the desert. Out there was nothing but some junked cars and a few trailers and mobile homes, all owned by the same family, known locally as troublemakers. And the clerk was part of this family and lived down that road. I thanked my random Texan stranger, who I will forever remember as Texas. He really saved me. I quickly followed his directions out of the town that had suddenly become a terrifying trap. The escape from the small town was a moment of sheer, blind terror, but it wasn't the first time I'd ignored my sanity just to keep moving. I had forgotten the details of the start of my trip, but the memory came flooding back to me later. I hadn't started alone. I had just quit a bad job and was crashing at my cousin's place. Money was grim. When an old friend from high school in Oregon, Dan, called, offering to pay for gas, food, and hotels for part of the trip in exchange for a ride to his extended family's place in Texas, I quickly agreed. The reality was a nightmare. Dan had suffered severe head trauma a few years before, and the sweet, genuine person I knew was gone. He was perpetually out of it, had zero filter, and was aggressively inappropriate. He started off just being verbally inappropriate, but it escalated quickly. He'd walk into the room unannounced, stroke our feet as he walked by, and constantly touch us. I caught him smelling my hair and secretly taking pictures of us. I was furious, but I had a growing problem. He claimed he had lost his wallet and couldn't pay for anything. 2 weeks later, we were on the road. Crossing a bridge right before Shreveport, he reached over and slid his hand across my upper thigh. I swerved, smacked his hand away, and promptly began yelling at him. A police officer pulled us over, caught the byplay, cast a significant glance at Dan, who was acting like a total weirdo, and let me go. "Good luck," the officer said. At the next stop, I discovered his wallet was wedged firmly between the dashboard and the side window, a clear deception. He then admitted his family hadn't put money into his account. I was now supporting a grown man and seriously worried about running out of money before reaching Oregon. When we stopped at a hotel, I could only afford 1 room. I made sure there were 2 beds. I was lying down trying to calm myself. Suddenly, the bathroom door flew open. A great cloud of steam billowed out. When the steam cleared, he was standing there, completely naked, and started doing a gyrating dance, trying horribly to seduce me. I started screaming. Once he saw his strip show was not having the desired effect, his whole expression changed. His face darkened with open anger. He started screaming and ranting at me about how great he was, calling me names while naked. The reality of my situation hit hard. I was alone in a hotel room far from anyone I knew with a mentally unstable man who felt I owed him sex. I lay there all night, holding my dog, terrified that if I fell asleep, I would wake up to him trying to assault me. Thank God for my pit bull. The next morning, the only reason I didn't leave him there was his promise that his family would give me some cash when we arrived. I needed it desperately. I took off on zero sleep and pure nerves. The final day with Dan was a nightmare of escalating paranoia and control. He was supposed to help me drive, but he didn't have a license, so I drove on zero sleep. He immediately got us lost for an hour and a half because he wouldn't admit he didn't know the way. I used that time to scream at him. I decided to stop before we hit the main highway to let Kay, my dog, pee. We stopped in a park area with a playground in some tiny town. I walked her, having left Dan in the truck. These 7 guys were walking by adjacent to the park. When they saw me, they all stopped, talked a second, and almost as one gave me the same creepy grins. They turned off the street and walked across the park to the playground area a few hundred feet in front of me. They leaned on the equipment in a loose horseshoe centered on me, still smiling. They were all dressed the same, ranged from early teens to early 30s, and generally gave off bad vibes. They were staring me down until I felt like a rabbit that saw a fox. Kay, who usually loves everyone, started trying to drag me back to the truck in the opposite direction of these guys. I trusted her and followed, trying to act calm and confident. When I got up to the U-Haul, Dan had the back open. I tried to tell him to close it. We needed to go now, but he was oblivious. He kept insisting that we try to feed the dog since she hadn't eaten her last 2 meals. A quick side glance showed the men had separated. 2 were in the same place. 2 were circling wide to the right, 2 doing the same on the left. They were all still staring at us, and I had lost track of one. I spotted him. He must have started circling to the left before the other 2 because he was now almost directly behind the U-Haul, maybe 100 feet back. He was hidden from my sight where I'd been searching. I was officially losing my grip on myself. Full fight or flight mode took over. I knew I had searched every inch of space Dan could have possibly been around several times. These guys were circling us and we couldn't get away. Our phones were locked in the cab. My eyes strayed to the bag of dog food, the whole reason Dan had gotten out of the cab in the first place. I practically dove for the dog food bag, cursing and threatening Dan the whole time. I yanked it up and dumped it all over the back of the U-Haul. And there they were, the keys shining silver in the wave of brown kibbles. I could have killed Dan in that moment, but I just slammed and locked the back and got us the hell out of there. The rest of the trip to where I dropped him off is a blur. Eventually, he had me drop him off on some random main street in a little town that looked like all the others. We had a truly marvelous fight because I was angry that he wouldn't take me to his family for the cash, but I eventually gave up. I was just happy to be rid of him. I drove away from Dan and his chaos, exhausted but too overstimulated to sleep. I decided to try to get a few more hours in and get back into familiar interstate territory. My next stop for gas was in the little town where the attendant tried to send me to his family's desert dead end, the place where Texas saved my life. I realized that my detour with Dan had taken me far from the interstate southwest of Dallas, and way out in nothingness. The man at the gas station was likely looking to prey on a panicked, lost traveler. But the fear that truly stuck with me wasn't the gas attendant's dark intentions. It was the psychological terror I later read about in a newspaper article. A woman had been arrested at a campsite not too far from where I'd been, caught vandalizing RVs and tents. It made me wonder if the mocking laughter and the hand at the claw machine in my sample story, a separate incident, was the same girl. The fear was interchangeable. Later, in university, I had a severe panic attack watching the movie The Strangers. The plot was scarily similar to the campsite experience I'd had years before, being terrorized in an isolated place for no reason. The trauma remained, leading me to counseling and therapy for years. The most profound realization was the experience of my best friend, Jamie, who became involved with a seemingly normal, quiet guy named Ryan. Jamie started dating Ryan because he said so. He randomly approached her and declared they were dating. She accepted, thinking he was shy. But he was controlling, demanding to go everywhere with her and butting into every conversation. The control focused on me. He demanded to be added to our chats and calls, convinced she was cheating on him with me. He started lying about hurtful things I had supposedly said about her. He wore her down with persistence. The relationship was textbook abuse, cycling between mistreatment and sweet apologies. Their break was because he asked her to tell me to stay home when I planned to visit, and she refused. When I visited Vegas, I met him briefly. He seemed pretty normal. But what I didn't know was that he was already planning something horrific. The horror of Ryan's quiet, methodical control over Jamie was a profound lesson in human malice. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was insidious and isolating. The cycle of abuse reached a breaking point. After a particularly bad fight, Jamie threatened to call me and tell me everything, and she was going to leave town. He responded by shoving her to the floor and almost breaking her arm. He then apologized, promising to let her call me on Sunday and taking her hiking in Red Rock Canyon on Saturday. On Friday night, the police knocked on her door. They had received a tip from one of Ryan's friends that he was planning to hurt Jamie. They found a detailed suicide note about his plans to drive her out to the Nevada desert and end their lives together. If she didn't agree, he would stab her to death. They also found several knives in his car. The police never revealed who had tipped them off, but the intervention had been hours before he planned the murder. Jamie called me immediately and spilled everything, apologizing for keeping it from me. She had genuinely believed she could handle it alone. The terror I felt for her, the chilling realization that I had talked to this guy, met him in person, and yet he was already planning to murder my best friend, was overwhelming. The experience cemented a terrifying truth. The human predator often operates with quiet precision, not loud chaos. This realization was echoed in my own family history. My mother, in 1971 or 1972 when she was 14, was with her family in a heavily wooded area near Montvalo, Alabama, practicing with a rifle. My grandfather, who had taught his kids to defend themselves, suddenly became startled. He heard the roar of a car engine deep in the woods. He told everyone to hide under a pile of leaves. A blue Ford Galaxy pulled up. A man got out, dragged a woman's body from the car, and just dumped her there in the woods. Then he drove away. Once the man was gone, they emerged. The woman sat up and stared them straight in the face. My grandfather asked if she needed help. She said no, she would be fine. She hadn't put up a fight when the man dragged her from the car. She seemed alert and competent, yet utterly detached. My grandfather rushed the kids home. On the trail back, they passed the man in the blue Ford Galaxy driving out of the woods. He stopped and made small talk with my grandfather, asking how he was doing. My grandfather made sure the man saw he was carrying the rifle. The next day, my grandfather returned to that spot. The woman's body was gone. But he did find her wig, her purse, some Kleenex, and a pair of eyeglasses. He collected the items and took them to the police station, but nothing ever came of it. But the police officer taking his statement noted that the area was known for having shallow graves and being a dumping site. The final chilling detail. Early the next morning, my grandmother called my mother just before the kids left for school. She said not to take the bus that day. She would drive them instead. When my mother asked why, her grandmother said, "Because that car is waiting for you at the bus stop." The man in the blue Ford Galaxy hadn't been satisfied with his victim. He was now hunting the witnesses, waiting for them at their most predictable point of vulnerability. This pattern of quiet, methodical danger, the gas attendant, Ryan, the man in the Ford Galaxy, all solidified a profound lesson. The most terrifying threats in isolation are often the ones who appear the most organized and non-threatening. This principle was vividly reinforced by a later incident in my life, during a cross-country road trip with my husband. We stopped late at night at a gas station in a barren part of Texas. I went inside to use the restroom. As I made my way to the stall, I made eye contact with a woman coming out of the only other stall. She had wild gray hair, ragged clothing, and a large purple and green coat despite it being July. She stared at me intensely, her face set in an angry but wild look. She went to the sink and angled her body away from me, but her face was turned toward the mirror. Her body was tense, legs slightly crouched, ready to act. Her hands were at her sides, elbows slightly bent. I regretted leaving my purse and phone behind. I quickly shut and locked the stall door. I wanted her gone before I left the safety of the stall. I stayed there long after I had finished. Finally, I heard the smacking of her flip-flops as she made her way to the door. I heard it open and then slam closed. Then I heard it, breathing. The woman had only pretended to leave. She was positioned in the far corner, silent, waiting for me to emerge. I waited another 20 minutes before she truly left. I slipped out, washed my hands, and rushed down the hallway. Sure enough, crouched right outside the front door was the woman. She was waiting. She was hunting. And she was using a simple, organized deception to ambush a victim. The terrifying simplicity of it was the true horror. The cumulative experience of these encounters, the Texas roadside ambush, Ryan's calculated plan, the woman in the gas station restroom, taught me to live with a constant, low-grade sense of alert. I learned the patterns of the human predator. Vulnerability is identified, isolation is enforced, and trust is used as a weapon. This knowledge became crucial when I moved to a small college in LA County, bordering the cavernous region known as Turnbull Canyon. It had a reputation for scary folklore, cultic activity, killings, abandoned mental institutions, all originating from a single tragedy years prior. A photographer friend, Dave, asked me and another buddy, Jeff, to go out to the canyon at 1 a.m. to take photos of the LA skyline. I was a generally anxious person, and the reputation of the place had me nervous. We parked at the top of the canyon road and made our way to the trailhead. After walking 5 minutes, we noticed the faint glow of headlights in the distance. This was strange. The trail was only 5 feet wide and not meant for cars. We immediately packed up and ducked into the brush, waiting for the car to pass. An old, rickety pickup truck, the type owned by backwoods folk who preferred to be left alone, idled to a stop about 50 yards from where we were hiding. The truck's bed was missing entirely, and it sat on a lifted chassis. We watched in agonizing anticipation as the truck idled for several minutes before flooring it down one of the other trails. The roar of the engine echoed throughout the canyon. Dave, the photographer, wanted to continue, convinced it was just someone off-roading. But Jeff and I were reluctant. The presence of the truck was too deliberate, too intrusive. We trudged on with great reluctance toward the old water tower. After walking for about an hour, we finally made it to the top of the hill where the water tower stood. It was around 3 a.m. Dave got his shots while Jeff and I stood guard watching the trails below. Just as we were preparing to descend the hill, the truck came roaring out of the canyon below us, back onto the trail. The truck's engine revved loudly as the driver attempted to climb the hill toward the water tower. Scared out of our minds, the three of us slid off the side of the hill into the thick brush, clinging to plants and rocks. We watched as the truck slowly made it to the top and circled the water tower. After waiting nearly 10 minutes, trying not to make any noise, the truck eventually descended the hill, stopping in the middle of the trail not more than 100 yards away. A scruffy man in his mid-50s stepped out of the truck and into the glow of the headlights. He moseyed around, looking at the ground, and then knelt down, surveying the area intently. It became increasingly apparent that he was tracking something, our footprints. As we huddled together in complete terror, another man wearing a long, dark parka emerged from the brush right where we had been hiking, joining the first man. Apparently, he had been out there the entire time, just watching us, following at a safe distance. The two men talked for a long while, their voices too low to hear, while continuing to scan the area and examine our footprints. They eventually got in the truck and drove off down one of the forks in the trail. We sat in silence for nearly 2 hours to ensure the coast was clear before making a frantic retreat back down the canyon and to our car, just in time for morning classes. The terror wasn't supernatural. It was the cold, organized reality of being hunted by men who knew the terrain and were methodical in their pursuit. The encounter solidified the pattern. The human predator uses the environment's silence and rules to create a hunting ground. In the desert, it was the isolation of the highway. In the canyon, it was the rule that trails were for hiking, not driving. We were exposed precisely because we relied on predictable social norms. This knowledge, gained through trauma, became my final defense. I realized that to survive, I had to be more unpredictable than the stalker was organized. The next phase of my life became a practical application of these lessons. I learned to anticipate the patterns of pursuit by becoming an expert in their opposite. I studied methods of counter-surveillance and became obsessed with unpredictable chaos. I realized that the organized human predators, the ones who operated like Ryan or the man in the Ford Galaxy, relied on a victim's predictable panic. They relied on me checking my rearview mirror, on me seeking help, on me establishing a new pattern. I began deliberately introducing false patterns. I'd use my phone to call fake numbers, establishing false digital breadcrumbs. I'd drive in long, nonsensical loops before stopping at my true destination. I was creating noise not to hide but to drown out the signal of my fear. My pit bull Kay was an indispensable part of my defense. Her instinct was flawless. When she became aggressive, I knew the threat was immediate and physical. When she became anxious, I knew the psychological pressure was building. One incident, years later, perfectly encapsulated this strategy. I had just moved to a new city and was on a casual date with a man named Pete who I met on Tinder. He seemed normal at first, a software developer, but his behavior quickly escalated into unnerving control. He became annoyed when I ordered too much food despite paying for my own plate. He insisted on dropping me off, which I initially refused. The attempts at control grew desperate. He asked if I was meeting someone else after him. He got upset when I didn't want him to drop me off. After our second date, he messaged me saying he was starting to fall for me, completely disregarding my stated boundary of nothing serious. This was the Ryan pattern: identifying a victim, establishing control, and accelerating emotional commitment as a weapon. The final, terrifying confrontation with Pete began with escalating boundary violations. He showed up outside my apartment building unannounced. He didn't say hi. He demanded, "Show me which one is yours. I'd love to see how you live." I deflected him, insisting on dinner first. At dinner, his desperation was palpable. He kept taking calls and speaking to the person on the other end. "Yeah, I don't know. I can let you know by about 10 o'clock. He then turned to me, "Am I sleeping by you tonight?" The person on the phone, who I realized was someone he was living with, finally snapped, "No, you're not. Can you just get your things, please?" Pete was functionally homeless, using me as a quick target for shelter and control. He was desperate, disorganized, and thus extremely dangerous. When the meal was over, he insisted on dropping me off. I realized the full scope of his desperation. As soon as we stopped at my apartment, I executed my escape plan, born from years of processing the terror of the gas attendant and the canyon stalkers. I jumped out, grabbed my purse, and sprinted into the cafe under my apartment. I didn't stop there. I ran out the back exit, through the little gate that led to the secure rear section of my building. I ran to a neighbor's door on the second floor and hammered on it, explaining everything. I needed a human witness, an anchor to reality. I called the cafe to explain why I had run through like a maniac. I blocked Pete and immediately took steps to move. He had confirmed my biggest fear. Isolation and vulnerability are a physical currency. This experience was a perfect mirror of the past. The stalker was defeated not by violence, but by a pre-planned, unpredictable pattern of evasion that relied on the noise and chaos of a human environment. The ultimate manifestation of this psychological stalking came later, in an incident far more chilling because of its duration. I took a job at an establishment that catered to an adult audience, where I met a man who quickly became obsessed. The first night he bought me a drink. When I politely declined his offer to walk me to my car, he didn't follow. Standard for my profession. But he returned every night for a week asking for me. I was told he wanted to buy me another drink. Naively, I thought of the paycheck. When I sat with him again, he had this creepy grin. Not a sexual grin, but the kind where he knew something you didn't. The more I tried to leave, the angrier he got. A bouncer intervened, but didn't throw him out. I walked out to my car, and there he was, sitting on the bonnet. He grabbed my arm, insisting I give him a ride. I jammed my key into his shoulder as hard as I could, pushed him, jumped in my car, and drove away. He was left screaming and banging on the window. I called my work, warned the other girls, and cried myself to sleep. The owner gave me time off. For 2.5 weeks, he came in every night asking about me, clearly not believing the lie that I had quit. Then suddenly he stopped. I returned to work. Everything seemed normal, but I started being forgetful. I would think I left a door closed, but it was open when I got back. Lights on or off. Food left out. I convinced myself it was stress. This subtle intrusion kept up for a month. One day, I headed back home after realizing I'd forgotten something. The lights in my front room were on, and the TV was visible from outside. I headed inside, grabbing my stuff, and made sure to turn off the TV and lights. Suddenly, I froze. Standing, blocking the door, was the creep who had grabbed me. He just stood there, smiling that creepy smile. After a lifetime of silence, he spoke, "Welcome home, honey. You're back early." I was stunned. I screamed for him to get out. He just stood there, smiling, letting me freak out. A switch went off in my head. I threw everything I had at him, purse, keys, phone, and sprinted to the back door, running faster than I ever had in my life. I hid in the bushes, tears streaming down my face. I managed to sneak back to my house, jumped in my car, and called the police from work. The stalker was gone when they arrived. The police searched the house and discovered he had been living in my crawl space. That explained the doors, lights, and misplaced things. He hadn't been stalking me from a distance. He had been living inside my home for over a month, using his knowledge of my predictable schedule to move in and out of my living space. The ultimate psychological violation. The hunter had become the hidden resident. I packed up whatever I could fit in my car while the cops were still there and drove off, moving states. I realized his initial pursuit was a test to see how far he could push me, and the subsequent stalking was him using the temporary distance to establish a permanent, hidden residence. I still have no idea how he tracked me initially, but I knew the pattern was complete. He had used the knowledge of my predictable life to eliminate the distance. The collected trauma of these isolated encounters, the men in the canyon, the roommate, the stalker in the crawl space, created a single, unified theory of survival. The common denominator was always predictability and silence. The predators relied on the victim's adherence to predictable patterns, the same bus stop, the path home, leaving the apartment empty at the same time. They also relied on the silence of the remote environment, the desert, the canyon, the apartment hallway, to execute their plan without witnesses. My final line of defense became complete control of my own pattern and noise. I moved to a large, densely populated city, choosing an apartment building with continuous foot traffic and audible background noise. I deliberately cultivated a messy, unpredictable schedule. I left for work at a different time every day. I used different routes home. I stopped carrying a routine bag. I broke every pattern that could be used as an input for a predator's model. I also became obsessed with noise. I kept a radio on 24/7, tuned to static or talk radio, ensuring there was never a moment of pure silence in my home. I understood that silence was the predator's working environment. The ultimate challenge to this new routine came during a brief cross-country road trip I took to visit a friend. I was driving down a long, lonely highway, my mind alert but calm due to my new habits. I saw a broken-down car on the side of the road. I slowed, my instinct screaming caution, but my ethical training demanding intervention. I rolled down my window just a sliver. A woman was standing next to the car. Something about her wasn't right. I asked if she needed me to call a tow truck. She immediately tried to open my door. I explained to the woman that I didn't feel comfortable letting her in, but I would wait until the tow truck came. She immediately got a look of rage on her face and started berating me. "You're a big man. What am I going to do to you?" This was the crucial moment, the violation of the social contract. I knew this exact manipulation. Against my better judgment, I unlocked my door, figuring I was being cruel. She slipped in, immediately avoiding eye contact and fumbling in her purse. When I mentioned calling for help, she got aggressive, demanding I take her to the next town. I was so busy handling the situation inside the car that I completely missed the man who was hiding near her vehicle. It wasn't until he was almost at my driver's side door that I managed to catch him in my rearview mirror. Flight kicked in. I put my car in drive and sped off just as the man was reaching for my car door. I sped off and heard a ping noise. Then my rearview mirror exploded. He was shooting at me. The woman inside my car realized her plan was foiled. She started hitting me and yelling for me to stop and let her out. I reached a safe distance, pulled over, and demanded she get out. She managed to hold on to her oversized purse, but not before dumping half of what was in it onto my passenger seat. Wadded up napkins, lipstick, and drug paraphernalia. I shoved her out and sped off, my car door still open, shaking with adrenaline. I pulled over again, slammed the door shut, and locked it. I drove on autopilot. It wasn't until later that I realized how close I had come to dying. I tossed all her things into a trash bag and drove on. I did something I now realize was stupid. I didn't call the police immediately. I was too ashamed and too terrified of the potential investigation into the paraphernalia. The experience cemented the final rule of survival: never stop the vehicle. The near-death experience on the highway solidified my dedication to the strategy of prevention through pattern disruption. The stalkers relied on the victim's predictability. The murderers relied on the victim's compassion. Both were forms of exploitation. My vigilance grew absolute. I lived by a set of personal rules designed to be illogical to any external observer. I only wore dark colors in the daytime and bright colors at night. I never repeated a walking route within a 2-week period. I paid for everything in cash only, maintaining a pristine digital invisibility. I also embraced the power of the witness. I finally called the police about the highway incident years later when I was able to talk about it without collapsing. I posted my stories online detailing the stalkers, the weird gas attendant, the man in the blue Ford Galaxy, and the chaos of the U-Haul trip. I wasn't seeking sympathy. I was creating a public counter-narrative. I was making the predator's method of operation visible. The predators rely on the victim's isolation. By sharing the patterns, I transformed the private terror into public knowledge. The final, terrifying challenge to my system came in a simple, organized form. A quiet, unassuming man who approached me on a city street and asked for directions. I stopped, my heart rate steady. He looked harmless. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft. "Can you tell me how to get to the main post office? I'm new here." I paused, assessing his clothing, clean, well-fitting, his behavior, polite, direct, and his request, logically necessary. Every part of my training screamed normal. But I looked him straight in the eye and lied. I gave him a series of convoluted directions that would send him blocks out of his way, leading to a dead-end construction site, ensuring he wasted 20 minutes of his time. "Thank you," he said and walked away. I watched him go. I felt no guilt. The social contract was broken by the men who waited in the dark. My survival depended on maintaining my own internal logic. Years passed. I maintained my vigilance, transforming the trauma into a finely tuned survival instinct. My life was secure, stable, and deeply satisfying. The scars remained. I still keep a detailed map of escape routes in my head for every public space I enter. I still check the backseat of my car obsessively. I still carry a massive can of bear spray. But the constant fear was gone, replaced by knowledge. The lessons learned on the loneliest highway were clear. Vulnerability is a physical currency. Never stop the vehicle. Never let them inside the perimeter. The threat is a pattern. Defeat organization with chaos. Defeat predictability with randomness. Silence is their working environment. Always be loud. Always have a witness. Always keep the radio on. I never did replace the shattered rearview mirror from the highway incident. I ended up selling that car, trading that painful memory for a new vehicle and a new, clean pattern of movement. I still think of the woman in the van, and the terrified mother my grandfather protected. I hope they found peace. But I know the truth about the quiet predators who stalk the periphery. They rely on the victim's panic and the social rule of compassion. My life is no longer defined by the trauma of being hunted, but by the quiet confidence of knowing the hunter's rules. And to this day, if you knock on my door, you better have a very good explanation for why you are here. Because I will be listening and I will be ready. My survival is non-negotiable.